Not many people start their career as an in-house tax apprentice, but our guest for this episode, Caree Radcliffe-Scott, did back in 2015, and she's made a huge success of her career to date. She is currently an in-house tax manager for Balfour Beatty. However, her career can be described as squiggly or unconventional, as she had a stint for accountancy firms before moving back in-house, and she also essentially changed her specialism from corporation tax to employment tax. This episode is focused on how she has made a success of her career to date, despite it being squiggly and despite living with a long-term health condition, Crohn's disease, to help you have a happy and successful tax career without needing to take the traditional, more linear route. You're listening to episode 119 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast that helps tax professionals with their tax careers, passing their tax exams, and becoming a better tax professional.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode. So we are joined by Caree Radcliffe-Scott in this episode to hear about her squiggly or unconventional career and how she's made a success of it despite having challenges. Chloe is currently an in-house employment tax manager for Balfour Beatty after training in corporation tax and spending the majority of her career in in-house mixed tax roles. She unusually started her career as an in-house tax apprentice, progressing quickly before having a short stint in accountancy firms specialising in corporate tax reporting before going back in-house to work for some of the UK's largest corporates. She lives with a long-term health condition, Crohn's disease, and dropped out of university at 19, which is when she decided to start her career in tax. Chloe is an active member of the ATT and CIOT professional networks. She sits as Vice Chair of the ATT and CIOT Leeds branch and is a mentor as part of the ATT's Mentor Match programme. She also is a speaker on corporate and employment tax matters for both professional institutes. Whilst this episode is focused on having a squiggly career but making a success of it, her advice is super valuable even if you're not having a squiggly career. Her advice is applicable to anyone wanting success in their career, but not only that, having success whilst enjoying the work that you do. For rough timings on each section of this episode, head on over to the details section of the episode within your podcast player of choice, or head on over to the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP119. Key to being successful in pretty much any tax career is being able to use tax legislation and guidance as and when necessary. It can transform the quality and accuracy of your work and help you generate unthinkable results. In the past 18 months, being able to use tax legislation well and being able to tax research well has resulted in me getting a 180k tax refund from HMRC for an ex-employee who was taking their employer to tribunal, and it has also resulted in preventing a circa 700k income tax liability and circa 225k national insurance liability in relation to an employer that had an employee loan account. If I could not use legislation, neither of these things would have been possible. If you would like your tax teams to achieve similar results, then consider enrolling them in the Tax Research Masterclass. The next one starts on the 21st of May. If you'd like to explore this, contact me on either LinkedIn or using jack@thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com. Further details are available in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP119. Just one last point before we jump into the episode. ProTax Recruitment placed me at Danes where I worked for 7 years, going from tax assistant to senior manager. ProTax know the tax recruitment market very well, but let's face it, most of you are not looking to move jobs right now. However, they can provide you with helpful information that could help you, for example, realise you'd be happier or more suited elsewhere, that you're currently being underpaid, or they could help you get clarity on where you'd like to take your tax career. You can book a call with ProTax by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/bookprotax. By using that link, they will put you in touch with an appropriate team member, but there's a link to that in the show notes. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. To start us off, Chloe, do you mind just giving us a little bit about you and your tax career?
Yeah, so I'm Caree Radcliffe-Scott. I'm currently employment tax manager at Balfour Beatty. I've worked in tax for just shy of 10 years. So started my career in-house as a tax apprentice at Drax Group PLC as it's now known, but it's Drax Power Limited at the time, which is, for anyone not based in the north, a very large power station based out New York. So I was there for about 4 years, worked my way up from apprentice with absolutely no tax experience to group tax accountant when I left in April 2019. So moved from there to EY as a corporate tax specialist role in corporate tax compliance. I was there for about 2.5 years and then stayed in practice but moved away from the Big Four. So I went to a smaller firm in Leeds for a year just to see if practice was the right thing for me or not before I made a final decision. It wasn't, so I was only there a year and then moved to Asda. So I was at Asda for about 2 years as a corporate and employment taxes manager, so direct tax, covering all of it. And then where I am now, Balfour Beatty, so specialising in just employment tax. Really, really enjoy it. Love just the employment taxes side. And we could probably touch a little bit on that as we chat through.
Yeah, lovely. So I think you said to me before that you were the first in-house tax apprentice in the UK.
I think it was in the north, but yeah.
First enough, yeah.
Yeah, so it was fun, scary, quite challenging. So the apprenticeship had been written, and I think apprenticeships are fairly new when I started. So just like going back 10 years now, it felt to me a little bit like they'd written it just for people. So the program was written just for people who worked in practice and the kind of things that you'd see as a client sort of advisor relationship, and not necessarily in the same way as those was in-house work. So it required a lot of heavy lifting by me and my line manager to get it to fit and be appropriate so I could actually qualify, because there was a point where I was thinking, I'm not going to get my apprenticeship, I'm just going to get my ATT. And I guess the two things together are quite useful. Having not gone to university, having that qualification that's higher than A-level is very useful. So I wanted to get my apprenticeship. But yes, it was interesting, the conversations with Kaplan to try and sort of say, this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I guess I had no idea what people in practice did. So some of the questions that I was receiving, I just had no idea what they were talking about or how I would ever answer them. So I hope that the profession has come a long way in the past 10 years and now recognises that those in-house have very, very different experiences early on in their career to those in practice.
I've seen it in a similar level, because actually when I was helping some people through their apprentice, like over the past few years, like I actually think the apprentice is still mainly targeted at people who are trying to be accountants on ACA or similar. So I don't even think they've got it good for tax full stop, never mind in-house, which is like a subsection of working in tax, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit of a pain. I suppose then, like, when you took on the apprenticeship then, I mean, at that point, I suppose a few questions. Did you know that you wanted to work in tax? And did you really appreciate the difference, I suppose, between in-house and practice at the time? Or was it just, I want a tax job?
So yes to I wanted to work in tax, but that's a slightly complicated question. So anyone who knows me like fairly well will know that I wanted to be a vet. I wanted to be a vet for a really long time, and didn't get the results I wanted at A-level for health reasons, and then ended up in clearing and started to do a degree in economics because I panicked and I didn't know what to do. And when you get your results on A-level results day, no one says to you, here's a booklet of apprenticeships that you could also do instead of going to university. So went to university for 9 months, and when I was there, I just hated every moment of it. I met some really lovely people, but that's not why you're spending £9,000 a year. I hated every living moment of being there. I used to come home every weekend and just sat and thought to myself, what am I going to do when this ends? What is it going to look like? And some of the stuff I'd picked up from going to careers fairs and things like that when I was looking at what I was going to do after university. I'm a planner. I was looking at this in my first year. I'd seen people talk about Big Four and consultancy firms, being an accountant, that sort of thing. So I'd kind of thought to myself, ooh, what about if I did something like that? But again, people who know me will know I'm dreadful at maths. I'm awful. So I knew being a purist accountant would never be right for me. So when I was thinking about what I could do, if I left university, obviously I couldn't just leave and do nothing. So was trying to think outside the box a little bit, and that's where tax kind of came up. Read more about it and thought, do you know what, actually this fits perfectly. I'm not so dreadful at maths that I can't find my way around. I've built a great Excel spreadsheet for whatever I do. But there's a lot of law in there. There's a lot of analysing cases, reading through HMRC guidance. And that's the stuff that kind of really lights me up. I like that part of the job. It's also a lot more people focused than perhaps traditional accounting or bookkeeping roles are. So that's what kind of drew me to tax roles. So I only applied for tax apprenticeships.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And only tax apprenticeships in-house or tax apprenticeships
No.
generally?
So I applied for a few. So even 10 years ago, so people who have only been in their career listening to this, who have maybe been in tax for maybe 5 or 6 years, probably won't believe this, but there were virtually no tax apprenticeships available in the north at that time. So it would have required me to move down south. There were dotted apprenticeships around, but would require quite a bit of travel even in the north. So I applied for the role at Drax and 2 roles with HMRC. So I didn't apply for any practice roles because they just weren't there. And to be honest, I'd not really thought about the difference. I kind of just thought, I want to work in tax. I need to get my foot in the door, and I'll kind of just see what happens. I think despite being quite a bit of a planner, I was fairly short-sighted at the start. I just thought, well, let's get an apprenticeship. Let's see how it goes. If I hate it, it's 2 years. If I love it, it can be the rest of my career. And I didn't really analyse it much more than that. But my parents were quite sort of keen of like, oh, well, look, working in the civil service is great. That should be like what you aim for. So that's why I applied, I guess, for the civil service roles, as well as the fact I think the civil service are probably a little bit further on with apprenticeships than maybe the private sector.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, because you obviously started in industry then in the end, and I think if people were to ask me like where should they start their career in tax, I would probably say in an accounting firm or in practice, just because I feel like once you start there, like all the other doors open up quite easily. So I suppose for you then, when you decided that you wanted to make that move, what kind of happened then? How did that all play out?
So largely it was, if anyone has started their career in-house, they will acknowledge that they see a really small window of the world, particularly so with Drax being in the energy sector, I saw a really, really small window of the world and issues that I've never ever seen again in the rest of the 6 years that I've worked in tax after I left Drax. So what I was really conscious of was that if I carried on my career there, and I could have done that, I could have had a very good career continuing to work there, I probably wouldn't have been as well-rounded an advisor, but equally as well-rounded technically. And that's not to say that I wasn't exceptionally well-rounded technically. I think I had brilliant tax experience working at Drax, and I will always be very grateful to the people that I worked with there for bringing me to that point. But I think the moment that I went to EY, and in the first sort of 3 or 4 months, I realised how little I actually did know about everything else. And I think if I'd just stayed at Drax forever or stayed in an in-house role forever, I might have come unstuck at some point of, actually, I know a lot less than I realised, but I'd have climbed the ladder a lot more. And it'd have been more scary to admit I don't know something.
Yeah, because I suppose that one step back a second first, because obviously you went in as an apprentice, you got to group tax accountant. So was that 2 or 3 promotions technically to get to that role?
3 promotions to get to that role. So I got promoted when I qualified. So obviously lost the apprentice title once I got my apprenticeship. So I was promoted to group tax assistant. Did that role for a year. Was then promoted to group tax specialist for not long. Equally during that time, I was also part-time, so we can touch on that as well as we chat through. But then we had a group tax accountant. She went on maternity leave, so I was promoted to cover her maternity leave. So that role was a sort of maternity cover promotion, and was kind of just me stepping straight into that role. So I always see it in my mind like a promotion, even though it was always intended that I would step back down afterwards. But I think all parties involved knew what would happen if I was asked to do that. And we never ended up getting there, to be fair. I left before my counterpart came back from maternity leave. But yeah, there was the intention from everyone that I was never going to step back down. I'd either take another role somewhere else, or we'd find another solution to enable me to continue at that level. So it was always seen to me as a 3-step promotion whilst I was there.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you had some fortune in, to some extent, the fact that someone went on maternity and that role opened up. But what do you think you did over like that period of starting as a tax apprentice all the way up to that role to kind of get there so quickly? Because that was over a period of like 4 years, right? And I suppose you'd have been roughly 21, 22 at that time to have the title of group tax accountant. It sounds like a pretty good title for someone at that age.
Yeah. Work really, really, really hard. And that's not long hours. That is putting my hand up every time, asking for space in the room, listening to everything, not saying no unless, obviously, no one was ever unreasonable with me, but I would have said no if it was unreasonable. But being actively sort of taking part is a huge thing, not just doing the specific task that I was asked to do, delivering it and then leaving, which there are two schools of thought on this. And I think there are rightfully two schools of thought on it. But if you want your career to accelerate in the way that mine did in those early years, that engagement that I had with people and the willingness to go and speak to senior people, have a space at the table and acknowledge maybe I was just taking notes, but could I ask a question? Could I show enthusiasm? Went such a long way. And actually the amount I learned just from putting myself out there was unbelievable. I think if I'd have just sat back and done the things that I was asked to do and not questioned, not just said, oh, why do we do that thing? Or why does the process look like that? I probably wouldn't have learnt the things I learnt to be able to then apply them later down the line and prove that I was able to do a role at a higher grade.
Yeah. So I suppose then, it's pretty much, I suppose, curiosity, being curious in terms of the work that you're working on, having a real interest in wanting to learn and get better. I suppose that's why you were doing a bit more than the bare minimum as well, let's say. I'm not a big fan of that terminology, but yeah, you were essentially, you were asked to do, I don't know, X, and you did X plus Y plus Z on top of it as well to go a bit further and be a bit more helpful. And you're just engaged in the work. I suppose really, I'm guessing you were doing that because one, you wanted to get better. And secondly, you wanted people to see that you were keen in a way.
Yeah, there's definitely I don't think people intentionally assumed that because I was young, I wouldn't be very good. But I felt like I had a point to prove more than some of my peers who had joined on graduate schemes. I've always said that even now, sometimes I struggle a bit with imposter syndrome. I feel like I don't have a space at the table, but I really felt that then. Like you say, I was really young. I looked really young. Some people used to say to me, like, why aren't you at school? And I mean, probably rightfully so. I was like 19. But I think that feeling of feeling like I didn't have a place at the table in such a large business. This is a FTSE 250 business with some really senior finance people. No one ever consciously made me feel like I didn't belong, but I internally felt like I needed to prove myself. And I think that really pushed me to sort of aspire to be greater sort of every day. And that's not like do great things all the time. It's just incrementally each day I turn up to work, just try and be a little bit better than I was the day before. And it comes in peaks and troughs and everyone acknowledges that. But what I've never been is someone that sort of like rests on my laurels and thinks, oh, this is great. Like I'll just do what I need to do and go home, which is fine. If people are in that space, then that's brilliant and they're doing what they need to do their job. But for me as a person, I just always feel like if I do that a little bit more, I'm proving that I'm here for a reason and I'm adding value and people can see me as that visibility point as well.
Yeah. I think all the stuff we've talked about just there, what I would say are common traits with people who do succeed quickly in their tax career. Let's say they progress quickly, they develop quickly, and then they'll get into a good position pretty early on. Everyone who I've seen that's done that is pretty much done exactly what you've said. And I think even because I've had some people that I would say didn't really care about doing a good job. So I've worked with people that are like that, but they would probably say that they did. So I don't know whether it's that people like you, for example, and people in similar situations to you, just care more than the average person, or whether those other people that say they care actually don't really care that much. They just say they do. It's hard to know, but I think, around the care point, wanting to do a good job, like genuinely wanting to do a really good job, I think that's probably like the guiding star for a lot of the other bits that you then ended up doing as a consequence of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say, like, sometimes it's not about like how much you care internally, but I always asked for feedback. So whatever I did, it was like, how could I do this better? What did I do that was really good and I can repeat again? From being quite junior and quite young. And I think to echo what you've said, I've also worked with people who have kind of said to me, it's not fair. Like, how have I not got to where you've got to by this point? And to be fair, I think that about other people as well. So it's not exclusive. I'm not sat on a pedestal. But I've often said to them, like, you do a good job in what you do, but you're not asking about improvements. So you're never going to progress because the only way you can progress is acknowledge that you don't do everything perfect, and you need to be able to stretch yourself to the next level or be even greater in your own role. And the only way you can do that is asking and getting feedback and then acting on the feedback. No one's going to hand it you on a plate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just need to realise, I suppose, that in order to be promoted or to be paid more, that they need to be more valuable than what they were before. So if they're still the exact same person with the exact same skills and the exact same qualities, they're no more valuable than what they were before. So I think even though people can do, say, a good job in their current role, if they're still the same values before, they're going to get, I suppose, stagnant in that role, let's say, which is, I suppose, what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely fair. I think there's almost a difference between what you currently get paid to do for your current role and the bonuses and your remuneration in your current space, which is a different conversation if you don't feel like you're fairly paid there, versus I want to go for a promotion. I need to prove X, Y, and Z to enable me to get there. And I would say I would give a lot of credit to the managers and the head of tax I work with at Drax as well, because I think they were very good at setting out, particularly when I had a group tax manager above me, really good at setting out really clear parameters and objectives about how I could get to the next point, rather than it being sort of arbitrary, which I've also had. Of, oh, if you do this thing and if you do this thing, and it's quite fluffy and not measurable, that'll get you towards being promoted, versus we need you to achieve X, Y, and Z, deliver these things on this timescale, have these meetings with these stakeholders that can prove to us that you are capable of being promoted.
Yeah.
And you've got to do some of that yourself as well.
Of course, yeah. Well, it sounds like you were, I suppose, somewhat fortunate then that the people at Drax were really good at setting that out very clearly for you. And it sounds like you've also experienced the flip side then. With that, like, in the instances then where they're more like woolly about it, is there anything that you found that's kind of worked to help it become more definitive, or have you just found that those people that are woolly are always going to be woolly and you're never going to be able to get out of that situation with them?
A bit of both. I think some of it is the way probably practice is set up versus in-house, in the sense that sometimes there's a sentiment that you've got to sort of earn your keep and like serve your time before you get promoted, which I do not stand with. Whatever, like, you could be doing an average job for 10 years and someone could do a great job in 2 years. Like, time served means nothing to me. But I do think sometimes having more woolly objectives allows for flexibility in achieving things or measuring people's success differently. It's not just about delivering outcomes, which I think for an in-house organisation is probably easier to focus on, because you've either got to deliver value to shareholders or value to your investors if you're privately backed. So there's like two options, whereas I think in practice it's much more, it's a people business fundamentally. So I think some of the objectives can be woollier because they kind of need to be to ensure that everyone has a shot of being able to get through the system.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on the same page, by the way, about the time served thing. I think people end up using that as like a cop-out a lot of the time in accounting firms as well, because that's an easy measure, right? How many years have they been in the role? Whereas it's much more hard to assess someone and go, well, what do we actually expect of a senior manager? And does this person have the skills to do that? I actually think probably most accountancy firms are not particularly clear on what they believe, say, a senior manager should be and should be doing. And so it makes it almost impossible to assess it without looking at the years of experience.
Absolutely. And I think there's some of that of, well, I've had to do it, so you have to do it too, which it's the worst sentiment to apply to anyone. It's the one thing I wish we could change about the profession, that like, I've clearly had a very different path to everyone else. So if I applied, well, I've had to do X, Y, and Z, so people who report to me have to do it. No one would ever get promoted because they're never going to have the same path. So I think trying to shake that off as much as we can is so important, because we don't all have the same track into the career. So therefore, when we progress, we can't apply the same notion.
Yeah, no, agreed. So let's talk about then, I suppose, the period of you swapping from Drax to EY then, because I think when we spoke briefly before, you mentioned that actually you found it quite difficult to get people to like believe in you, I suppose, that you could do the in-house jobs, right? You found it tough to like get your foot in the door, but you obviously ended up getting the EY job, so you got there in the end. But like, what was that experience like? Like, what were people saying to you? Why were you getting shut down, and how did you kind of work with that to get the EY job?
So I had a real varied experience. So I'd not really interviewed at all whilst I was at Drax. So like, I'd gone from interviewing for an apprentice role, which, whilst was difficult because I'd never worked in a professional service sort of area before, was targeted at someone who'd never worked in professional services before, to then go for an experienced hire job where I had like no idea what to expect. And the recruiter I worked with was brilliant in supporting me, but it was still really daunting. I had a couple of firms, large firms in Leeds, that wouldn't interview me because I didn't have a degree and I wanted to go in as an experienced hire. I also had other firms that said, oh, well, we don't really know what Chloe's done. We can't really quantify her experience. She'll need to come in at a lower grade than what she's working at now. And not only for my personality type, but for just how I value myself as a person, I felt like I was kind of devaluing my experience and what I can bring to the table if I was to say, oh yeah, I'll accept a trainee role or I'll accept a sort of junior role when I've been working at a tax accountant grade, which is probably equivalent to like manager or assistant manager, somewhere in that sphere, for 9 months. So it was quite eye-opening is probably the thing. And it certainly knocked my confidence a lot, because I felt that coming out of Drax that I'd got really valuable experience. I'd always had really great feedback from quite senior people in the business and had great visibility. And then to be told like, oh, we think you're a junior, I was just thinking, either you don't get it or I'm completely missing something. And at the time, I just felt like I was completely missing something. But then equally, I had a few other interviews, and EY being one of them, where they kind of got it a lot more. They understood what I did, technical experience that I brought to the table. I wasn't just chatting to advisors all day in my job at Drax. I did a lot of work myself, or I worked with the team to do a lot of work ourselves. We weren't just farming it all out to advisors and just being glorified project managers. But I think it was really hard to get that across in a way for two reasons. That there's a confidentiality thing, obviously. All my experience was with one employer and everyone knew who that was. So I was conscious that I couldn't talk about things too broadly, because then I would be giving things away. But then I guess, secondly, I didn't know how to explain it in their world because I'd never seen their world. So that was really hard for me to try and explain what I actually did on a day-to-day basis that didn't seem dumbed down or not as intricate as maybe people quite appreciated.
Yeah. How did you end up doing it then in the end, do you think? Like, how did you get across like your level of skill and quality and value then in the end, do you think? Did you like figure out any like little tricks that were helping? Was it literally just persistence? Like how did you get through it?
I consulted with people I'd worked with. So it was when I left Drax, the team had changed quite a bit. So some of the people I worked with had already left. So consulting with them about actually, how should I approach this and what does this look like? And some of the team even who were still there were quite supportive and said like, this is what I would say, this is how I'd get these things across. There's a really great group of people there. So being able to use them as sort of like a sounding board is brilliant. I think some of it as well was just, I'm quite weird. I talk to myself and just trying to interview myself and what would I want to hear if I was interviewing someone helps a lot. And I do that even today. Sometimes before a meeting, I'll just chat to myself and think, is what I'm about to say the right thing? Or am I being sort of like jumbled up? And I think sometimes I do struggle with getting my words out. So one thing I really did focus on was, how do I go to an interview and be as succinct as possible and appear as confident as possible, obviously without being arrogant, but just say what I need to say about what I do in a confident way, and then don't waffle beyond that. And I think a lot of that, you don't even need to explain yourself that much. It's just the manner you bring yourself across in gives people confidence.
Yeah. I think there's one key thing I picked up on that you said, though, is that initially you didn't feel like you could explain what you did in a way that the people that were interviewing you would understand and appreciate it. And I think that's probably a really important point, actually, because it's not about what you understand what you're saying or that you understand what you mean. You need them to understand what you mean. And I think even ignoring interviews for a second, working in tax, I think that's super important, because we always need to be talking in that kind of crossover between where you know what you're saying and they also understand what you mean by that at the same time. So yeah, was it just what was it then for you back then? Was it terminology that was different in-house compared to like in practice? Did you just not know the in practice lingo? Like, what do you think it was at the time then that was making it hard for you to talk in their language?
I think some of it is the difference between expectations of grades. So in my mind, someone sort of like working at assistant manager to manager level was probably different to what they expected. And that's because I didn't have loads of clients and I wasn't out there trying to sell services and spot opportunities. That kind of, I was spotting opportunities, but it was opportunities internally, and trying to explain that is quite hard, of how there's some crossover in skills, but the way that you implement those skills is very different. I also think, just stepping back from it, I had such a blinkered view on what I did. I couldn't explain some of the non-tax things to anyone listening who works in house. There's so much non-tax stuff we do on a day-to-day basis. Trying to get that across and show that that adds value, quite hard, because in practice that wouldn't be chargeable time. So it would, and I understand that now, but at the time I probably didn't appreciate. I was explaining I did all these various different things, but actually to someone who's interviewing for me for a tax role, they're not interested in some of that, because I wouldn't be doing that with them. So it was probably my interview technique of thinking about what was valuable in-house might not actually be that valuable in practice.
Yeah. Just a reminder, if you'd like to achieve results, like I mentioned at the start of this episode about saving your clients huge amounts of tax, then take a look at the Tax Research Masterclass, whether it's for you or for your team. Email me at jack@thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com, or you can message me on LinkedIn, or you can find more details at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses. You can also book a call with ProTax Recruitment to have a chat with them about anything related to your tax career. To book a chat, head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/book-pro-tax. All of the links mentioned here and my contact details are in the show notes for this episode, also at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP119. So then, obviously, you got the job at EY then after all that. It sounds like it was quite a lot of hard work, actually. But again, I suppose it goes to show that to get what you want out of your career, or to develop, to progress, that whether it's in your role, whether it's when you're looking for a new role, that you need to put a lot of effort in, really, to make a success of it. That seems to be a common trait for what you did in your early stage of your career, and I'm sure it continued as well. But then you went to EY then, so and another accountancy firm, I think. Was it 2 in total? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I've worked in practice twice.
So obviously had that stint then. So when you left Drax, then it sounds like one of the reasons was, well, you were in this maternity role that you're covering, and something was going to have to happen at the end of that, and it was probably a bit uncertain. So you kind of thought maybe now's the chance to do this. But when you moved over, then, like, why did you decide to move to an accountancy firm then, as opposed to, say, another in-house role? And like, yeah, what were you thinking at that moment in time? What was your decision process like?
So the biggest driver was broadening my tax experience. So I had a mixed role at Drax. So I did mostly corporate tax, but I did a little bit of customs duties, and probably about 20-25% of my role was employment tax. So I realised that actually the way that I and we churned through a lot of what I call compliance when I was at Drax, but turns out it's not compliance when you get into the wider world of advisory versus compliance in practice. It was coming up with those sorts of things of, actually, I do loads of capital allowances reviews at Drax, and I do SAO and all these different sort of claims and reviews and processes that in a corporate tax compliance role get passed to other teams. And actually the intricacies of pulling together a corporate tax return and doing all that advice, I'd not seen fully. I guess the other side, I had no idea, aside from being on the other side of an audit, what auditors did at all. I, having only guessed being a purist tax person, sat and done sort of statutory accounts disclosures and corporate tax returns, in my head I was thinking, how can it take up for a tax team so much time? And actually I got such a great appreciation of that when I moved to EY and realised that it is absolutely not for me. But I never would have known that had I not gone and done it. And I think I'm the sort of person that sort of thinks to myself, how can I be as well-rounded as possible all the time? And if that does mean doing something that makes me feel uncomfortable, or that, do you know what, might be temporary, that's okay. So I think I've started with a squiggly career and then just continued to keep it squiggly, because, you know what, like, life's too short. Like, give something a go. You don't know if you're going to like it or not. If you don't like it, there's always a path to go and do something else. But if you love it, you've found something that that you enjoy that you never would have known. So that's kind of what I had in the back of my head when I went to EY, was that if I don't like it, I can just go and find another job. If I love it, I never would have known if I'd have not made the jump.
Yeah. So when you're talking about what you didn't like there, was it the fact you said you don't like compliance roles, or that you think you don't like Big Four or even more broadly accountancy firms? Like, what was it that you didn't like, do you think?
I was rubbish at audit. If anyone who worked at EY would have like a close rubbish. I really struggled. I guess no accounting qualification, not gone through a standardized process. To be dropped in to do audit work was so much harder than starting in my first few weeks working in tax, full stop. It was so hard. And my brain kind of just doesn't work in that kind of way. So I really, really struggled. And because of how the team was structured, we had to do audit work. So it wasn't like I could kind of carve out and say, I'm going to do corporate tax compliance and this is what my role's going to look like. Everyone had to do audit work. And it's really valuable. And I think the team there do an absolutely incredible job. There's amazingly strong people. I acknowledged quite fast that I was not one of them. And I think to be great and succeed in your role, you don't always think you're great. You also acknowledge I'm not good at these things. So I'd acknowledge that, but I was really good at the compliance. So it made it really challenging that I was good at advising, I was good at pulling together comp and stat account disclosures, but I was rubbish at the actual process of doing an audit.
Yeah. And when you say an audit here, do you mean like a full-on statutory audit, or do you mean like auditing someone else's tax work, for example?
So so auditing someone else's tax work, but in the parameters of doing a normal statutory audit, if that makes sense. So auditors would do their full statutory accounts audit, and then they would pass specialist elements, which include the tax disclosures, over to the tax team. And you've got to follow lots of processes and lots of documentation, which I really, really struggle with. It's one of the biggest things that I still today, I don't have to do that much of it, but doing that was just, I couldn't get my brain to slot it in and work out what I needed to do when. I needed quite a bit of hand-holding, and I knew that was holding me back, but wasn't a necessary thing to work in tax. You didn't need to be an auditor.
Interesting. So, I mean, in my different terminology, then what I would probably say, so would you class then like a tax due diligence or a compliance review, or I suppose an audit, a tax audit? Are all those the same thing when you're talking about like auditing?
No.
No.
Because I quite like due diligence. So audit is purely getting large companies' statutory accounts through an audit process that they need to do to be able to publish. So it'd be like listed or very, very large privately backed companies that have got an audit requirement under the like financial accounting regulation rules. So it's only like the very largest companies that have specialist tax teams looking at it. So lots of big numbers, lots of complicated concepts, which I was fine with conceptually, but the moment you asked me to look at them in the context of someone else's spreadsheet that I'd never seen before and to try and document all of the things they needed.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, there is a distinction then between like doing a tax review, let's say, or a tax due diligence, and the tax side of an audit. Then I've never heard of that before, but I've never known of a tax person doing that before. But that might just because I've never worked in corporation tax, for example.
Probably, yeah. I think a lot of my curiosity at the time when I joined UI was, this doesn't feel like tax. This is tax. This is an accountant's job. But I was told quite quickly this was definitely tax. But yeah, if you've not done an accountancy qualification, actually trying to do that is like trying to climb a mountain with no equipment.
Yeah, I bet it's hard. But it's always hard to follow someone else's workings anyway. So if you're looking at someone else's spreadsheet and you haven't got them there to talk you through it and tell you what it means, it can be quite hard to figure out what on earth they've done. Particularly when I'd say a lot of, actually maybe not a lot, but there's definitely a large amount of accountants that would do some workings that make sense to them, but that it's not set out in a logical way, or there's no like audit trail of how they've got there, anything like that. And then you need to reverse engineer it in a way to figure out what they've done. I'm guessing that bit is what the bit that, or at least part of the bit that you found difficult as well. But I suppose at least you figured out that you found it difficult then. So you found out that didn't really work for you. So then I'm guessing for the next role you took, you made sure that wasn't an element of it, and it was more so the things that you were good at.
Yeah, so I went to a purist advisory role for a smaller firm in Leeds, and it was kind of like a last-ditch attempt with practice for me. That what I didn't want to do is only have my experience in the Big Four and say, I don't like practice, it doesn't work for me, and just discount it, because I think that's quite short-sighted. There wasn't really an opportunity for me internally at EY to move at that time. So this was immediately post-COVID. So lots of recruitment freezes, all of that kind of thing. So there wasn't really a space for me to move. But obviously people's careers and lives don't stop just because COVID's happening. So I just said, look, I need to do something different. This role isn't working for me. I was gravely unhappy. It's probably one of the lowest points in my career. And I was not thriving at work. I was the opposite of thriving. And I just said, I need to do something different, but I'm open to a practice role if it's not audit focused and I can't do the hours I'm doing. It's just really unsustainable. So moved to an advisory role with a smaller firm because I'd said to myself, give it this shot. Again, if it doesn't work, like nothing bad's going to happen. You just have to find another role. It's not the end of the world. You can explain your story. You know what you're doing. And this role had a bit of due diligence. It had smaller OMB type tax issues in there, stuff that I'd not seen before, which gave me a little bit of sort of reason to keep going and think, oh, maybe tax is not that bad, because I was genuinely in a space where I just thought, you know what, I'm not going to just stop working in tax altogether, because if this is what working in tax is like, maybe I'm not cut out for it. And I'm so glad I didn't make that decision, because I think I do a great job now, and I think I really love what I do. But genuinely, sort of 2021 was almost the point where I just dropped out of the profession altogether, because I just thought I wasn't good enough and I couldn't keep up with what was needed. And I thought that was the be all and end all because it was Big Four. So my new experience was positive again. I learned a lot, but I think practice for me, I don't get the autonomy that I need. I had so much autonomy and independence at Drax. I guess resourcing kind of dictates some of that. Risk dictates some of that. There's obviously, with an in-house team, you're not given external advice. So I was able to do quite a lot on my own 2 feet. And I think in neither practice role, I got that level of being able to stand on my own 2 feet, own the bit of advice I've done, see it through from end to end. I kind of felt like I was asking permission to do my job, which doesn't work for me as someone who's quite independent. So hence why after a year, I decided, do you know what, I can't. Again, I was sort of thinking, do I want to work in tax anymore? And that's not a space I wanted to be in. So to be fair, leaving both EY and the smaller firm I worked at, I did apply for roles that weren't in tax because I just felt so disillusioned with the way I was at that time and what was expected of me. And in-house roles are odd. They don't come up that often. You kind of have to jump when one comes up, particularly in Yorkshire. So I was quite fortunate that the role at Asda came up at a time when I was kind of in this space. But I think if that role hadn't come up at that time, probably would have dropped out of the profession entirely, because I just felt like I'd never get that, what I had at Drax, back. But maybe that's the difference between in-house and practice. It works for some and it doesn't work for others.
Yeah, it's hard to know actually whether it's the difference between in-house and in practice, or whether the in practice roles you had just had the elements that you didn't like.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I've had a lot of autonomy since probably manager level in practice, and I try and give that to the team as well. For me, there's definitely elements where you're like, I want to check certain things before it goes out. I want to sign things off. I might change things more than I'd like to sometimes because I'm thinking about the client or whatever. But I'd say in the main, people in my team have autonomy, even at probably a junior level. So it's hard to know whether it is in practice, and maybe it is more prolific in practice where you have less autonomy, generally speaking. But yeah, I suppose it's a shame then, because that sounds like that was a big part of what you didn't like actually overall. Or was there other big elements as well that you also didn't like about it?
I mean, timesheets, awful. I don't like the concept of billable hours. I can talk for 20 hours about how I hate the concept of billable hours, but timesheets, the hours just generally, I think, because the business makes profit from people doing more hours, there's a culture of just work. And it's not about actually what value are you delivering at the end? How do your clients perceive you? And I think that in-house, obviously we don't have timesheets. It's about actually what advice are you giving? How are you enabling the business to go on and succeed and do the things that the business actually wants to do? And I think that for me was something I gravitate to a lot more, because yes, it's not quantifiable, but I'm not as much of a numbers person. So I don't necessarily need quantifiable outcomes to be able to say, oh, I did 60 billable hours last week. Great, but you could have been doing nothing for those 60 hours. actually, if I've been able to review a project and the tax implications of that project, provide some advice to the business, and they've gone on and been able to do what they need to do with no issues, that's what makes me feel good. That's why I want to work in tax. Less than, oh, I've done loads of billable hours and look how great I am. Because you don't see your family, critically. You don't have that balance if you're measured on, your success is measured on how many hours you do.
Yeah, and billable hours doesn't exactly equal value to the client either, because unless you get to the end point of the project or whatever it is you're doing, and the fact you spent 10 hours on it actually doesn't really mean anything tangible, does it, for that client?
Exactly. But so yeah, there was that. And then there's a bit of the sort of one firm mentality. I think the way that practice is set up, and I think it worked great for people who are really competitive. And I was warned about this when I moved to practice, but I think people are quite protective of their own clients and the value they bring for their own clients. And sometimes that comes at a cost to other clients in the firm or the firm as a whole. And I really struggled as I was going for manager promotion to get out of the concept in my mind that was, well, we should be putting resource to things that are going to give the greatest margin and give the greatest return to the business, or to retain clients that we've had for a long time, not a measure of one manager's more senior than another manager and therefore their client's more important kind of thing. And I couldn't get on with the politics of it. It just, I don't know, the way my brain works, just I couldn't buy into it. I really struggled. And I know for a fact that would have stifled my career, I think, if I'd have continued, because I just wasn't prepared or couldn't make my brain get my head around it. So that's a big thing, like that competitiveness I didn't quite understand. And I know that would have come at my detriment, because I probably would have just rolled over every time and gone, do you know what, my client can wait.
Yeah, it's probably, I don't know, a lot of what you're talking about is probably there in maybe 80% of accountancy firms, something like that. I don't think all of them are like it, to be fair. And
Agreed.
I think a lot of it is driven by the targets and objectives that are set for people. Because if their main target is bill X amount of money in your team or win X amount of work, then just naturally they're going to put that at like the top of their priority list. Whereas if you had a KPI that was something like, I don't know, how many times you supported a colleague and helped them finish something, or you helped them win you know what I mean, something that was more akin to collaboration, then I think you'd get more of it. Although saying that, I think if people were less short-sighted about like their objectives, I think they would work together more and realize that actually helps them with their own goals more as well. But it's just not the way that most people think, unfortunately.
Exactly. It's tough, but I think, like I say, it works brilliantly for some people, and I do acknowledge that probably some of my experiences are not the same as everyone else's experience that they've had in practice, but I do think there's a lot of common themes that people listening to this might be nodding along going, yeah, that's exactly what I'm facing. And I think for me, it was just saying, do you know what, this works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for me. And therefore, to enjoy my job and to be proud of what I do and not feel like I'm failing every day, I've got to make a change. I can't expect the business to change and the people I work with to change. It's on me to either acknowledge that I'm just going to be happy with this and I'm going to try my best, or I need to step away and allow someone else to take that space that I'm kind of taking up and let someone else do a better job than I would be able to do.
Yeah. I think this is an important lesson though for people, actually, because I think you're an example of there's a tax role that probably works for you. If you're in one there that's not right for you, maybe it's because it's in-house or an accounting firm, or maybe a wrong specialism, that doesn't mean that you're not suited to tax, ultimately, does it? It just means that bit of tax you're not suited to. So I think that's probably an important lesson for some people, because particularly I'd say some people, well, as you kind of said for yourself, you struggled with the auditing side of it, but you don't struggle with the other sides of it. And I think if people played to their strengths more and just acknowledge that maybe this isn't for me for whatever it is, maybe I find it too hard, maybe I just don't enjoy it, whatever it is, then it's going to only help them with their career. Because you've obviously you've moved, I suppose you made the EY move to BHP on the basis of this isn't for me. You then made the move from BHP to ASDA on the basis this isn't for me. And so you've made like two moves, I suppose, on the basis you didn't think it suited you well, but you've still obviously done well in your career to date.
Yeah. And I think it's that framing of you've not failed. You've just acknowledged that it just doesn't work for you. I mean, if we were all the same, the world would be awful and the world of work would be awful. But we need the differences. We need the differences of thought. And I know this is quite fluffy, but it's really important that we acknowledge that and we do something that works for ourselves. And if people take nothing else away from this podcast, that's the one thing that's like, just stay true to yourself. Sort of my guiding light has always been that, like, do what in the day I retire, when I look back, just do the stuff I'd always be proud of. Don't ever think, oh, do you know what? I stayed there for too long because I just felt pressure, or I didn't know what to do, so I just froze, because you'll just be disappointed to do yourself in future.
Yeah. I mean, I think I know the answer to this already, but do you at all like regret the decision to move from Drax to EY and from EY to BHP, or are you kind of glad you did it because now you know that it's not for you?
I rarely regret things because I think we do everything for a reason. I probably, if I could do things again, I probably would have stayed at EY a little longer and then just gone for an in-house role. But I think I had to leave just for personal reasons. It was just not great for my health. I couldn't keep up. I just could not keep up. And that wasn't technically, it was just volume of work. The people in that team are incredible. They are so good. And I just wasn't at the same sort of caliber to be able to keep up with the amount of work. And I guess that's partly due to health reasons. It's something that I can't help. But yeah, so if I could have stuck it out a bit longer, I think then moving just straight into a manager role in-house probably would have been the best route. But I've learned stuff from every role I've been in. And I've also networked well. I've kept some good contacts from each role that I've worked in. So I think that's really vital. I've got some friends too. So taking those positive things away just for me means I don't really regret anything I've done. So yeah, no to regrets is probably what I would say.
So at some point you kind of made the flip in tax specialism from primarily corporation tax to primarily employment tax. Like, when did this happen? Like, why did it come about? And like, why did you try to do this? Because this is like another element of you having your squiggly career, I suppose, because not only are you flipping between in-house and in practice, but you're also flipping between specialisms.
So my role at Drax had employment taxes as part of it. So we had a payroll team, but what we didn't have in the tax team of 3 for a vast part of my career at Drax, there was just me, the head of tax, and a group tax manager. But they were both sort of corporate tax trained accountants. We didn't really have anyone with employment tax knowledge. So it was one of those opportunities that I kind of put my hand up for and said, I'll learn more about it. What do you need me to get involved with? And I'd started to build up a lot of employment taxes knowledge during that time. So still really early on in my career. And I really, really liked it. I loved it. I thought it was super interesting. I loved the people elements, the interaction with HR, interaction with payroll, various different teams, internal audit. It felt to me a lot more varied than a corporate tax role, but it was always kind of like my side gig. And then didn't really do it at all at EY. It was purest corporate tax role. When I moved to BHP, it obviously was a mixed tax role, and the due diligences I worked on also had obviously employment tax issues, which I kind of gravitated again a little bit more towards, kind of showed that this is what I really enjoy. I like talking about it. I'm interested in it. But the volume of work just wasn't there for me to be able to specialise a little bit more. So when I moved to Ulster, the role again was a corporate tax role, but actually there was a lot of employment taxes that needed covering because, again, teams corporate tax focused, the head of tax, the senior manager, both corporate tax people. So they needed some more employment tax expertise. So for me, it was kind of, it felt fortunate, but then also an opportunity for me to be able to kind of engineer more employment taxes knowledge. And anyone who has an employment taxes role, as I know you do, Jack, will know that the in-house roles in employment tax are so rare. They just don't come up. So when the Balfour Beatty role came up, I was in 2 minds because I was thinking, I'm a corporate tax person by trade, by qualification. How on earth am I going to fare with this? Like, I didn't know what the market kind of looked like. But I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I can explain my experience. Actually, I've got quite a well-rounded view on tax as a whole. I can spot opportunities cross taxes. So obviously we're successful come here now. But the core thing, the core principle that sort of led me to the role I'm currently in and changing specialisms was doing what I love and doing what I enjoy. Not just coming to work and going, this work grinds me down, but it pays my bills. You can acknowledge that work's not the be all and end all, but also do something you really enjoy when you're there, which is what I'm about. I don't think if I was just paying my bills, I'd turn up to work. I definitely wouldn't do a good job. I want to really enjoy what I do and find that thing. And I've been fortunate enough to find it. As frustrating sometimes as employment taxes can be when you're dealing with people and their individual issues, there's also so much positive that comes out of it as well. You can really see a genuine impact, probably similar to personal tax. You can see a genuine impact on a person, and that's really valuable to me.
Yeah. I mean, then, because it's hard to say, actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking about this, like, if I was the person that was hiring the employment tax manager, Balfour Beatty, would I perceive someone that's already worked in employment tax, but say has no in-house experience, would I perceive that as more valuable? Or would I perceive someone that's got in-house experience and just a little bit of employment tax experience? Like, which one would I prefer? And I suppose it might depend, actually, but I'm guessing as part of kind of the whole recruitment process that you went through there, you had to convince them that you're like the right person for it. So how did you go about that then? How did you go about like convincing that you were the right person over someone that, let's say, has been 100% employment tax throughout their whole career?
Great deal of humility. I did not go in and profess that I know everything, but what I was able to do is kind of articulate the areas that I had worked in the past. Obviously, I'd never worked in construction as well, so there's a lot of construction-specific areas that I knew I didn't know about and could articulate in the interview. I didn't know about these things, but I'm prepared to learn. If someone's prepared to give me a shot and help coach me through it, and I'll do a lot of my own learning in my own time as well, then I will be like, whatever you need me to be, I will do the job. And I think that willingness and the acknowledgement went quite a long way. I think if I'd have gone in and sort of been like, yeah, I've worked in-house, I've done X, Y, and Z, I'm so great, probably wouldn't have been as positive an outcome. I guess the role itself as well is quite varied and needs probably different ways of thinking. So I think it's not always about when you go for an interview or when you're thinking about your career, it's not always about being the perfect fit for what you see on paper. It's actually what are your strengths and weaknesses, and do they align with what they want as a person to fill that role? Because I think we get quite obsessed with job descriptions and fitting a mold when actually we're all people. So your manager, or if you're a manager, the people you are reporting into you kind of want the same approaches, and gelling with that manager is really important. So I think that went quite a long way, and that applies to whatever role, whether you're changing specialisms or not.
So given that your career has been like quite squiggly, I think that's the word you use to describe it. So given that it has been quite squiggly, like, what do you think has been then the secret to you making a success of it and still doing well, I suppose, despite the fact that your route has been very unconventional compared to like the normal route, let's call it?
I think I've touched on this quite a bit. So the main thing, I will never ever not be afraid to do what I want to do. So I will happily take the counsel from other people, and I will often do this. I'll call people up, I'll send people messages, I'll ask my husband, my line manager, do you think I'm making the right decision here? What do you think I should do? But that's purely in a counsel space. It is not in a space of they're making the decision for me. So I always think, don't be afraid to make a decision, and you are accountable for that decision, whether it's right or wrong. And if it's right, celebrate yourself. If it's wrong, don't beat yourself up, but acknowledge, don't do that thing again. Just make a slightly different decision, see if you get a different outcome.
Yeah.
But celebrate your wins. They are so important. We all have so many wins. Even if it's literally, I didn't want to get out of bed this morning, but I got up and I went and did work. It can be as small as that. It can be as big as I got promoted sooner than I thought I was going to get promoted.
Yeah.
Celebrate them.
Yeah, and the small ones are easy to, I suppose, not necessarily see either. It could even be as small as like you did a piece of work. I'm talking more from a practice perspective here, but you could have done a piece of work where like there's basically no changes to the draft that you produced. And that's a massive win as well. I say massive. It's a small win really, but you can, if you acknowledge it, it's bigger than what you might initially think it is. But I suppose just one final question for you then, because obviously you have taken this route that's not like common, let's say, for people to take. So for anyone that's like maybe scared or fearful of taking a path that like isn't the linear obvious one, which is accounting firm where it's very clear like the grades and how you can kind of climb the ranks, like what advice do you have for those type of people?
So I say this quite a lot, and I say it to a mentor as part of the ATT mentoring scheme. And I say to people that everyone cares about themselves way more than they care about you. And if you think about yourself and you think about the people you work with, you will remember very little about the people you work with, but you'll remember loads about yourself. So actually, take a risk, take a shot on yourself. If you make a fool of yourself, probably no one will remember. They'll probably think of all the times that you took a shot on yourself and you succeeded rather than failed. But we're so obsessed with self-failure, it stops people from making choices that probably would benefit them in future. I covered it before, but live your life. It's your life. Only you will regret it later down the line. And then I guess the final thing I would say is that acknowledge it might be tougher for you if you've not got a straightforward path. It probably will be tougher, but that's okay. Think of all of the things that you bring to the table from facing the adversity or whatever it is that makes your career less traditional or less linear. It doesn't make your career invalid because you've not followed the same path as someone else, even if someone tells you that it invalidates. I've faced different people's opinions in the past and it has shaken my personal confidence, and I won't let that happen again because actually it did nothing except make me see myself poorly. That person probably doesn't remember they've said what they said to me. So it comes back to just follow what you want for yourself and you won't be disappointed.
So for people who want to learn more about it, then Chloe, or maybe even get in touch, where are the best places for them to go?
So I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on there, Chloe Radcliffe-Scott. I have a profile picture, so you can see me. I am also, as I mentioned, an ATT career mentor, and I sit on the ATT and CIOT Leeds branch. I'm the vice chair there. So you can also reach out to me through my ATT and CIOT channel if you want to chat and catch up. We do lots of events in Leeds too, so for anyone who's based in Yorkshire and wants to meet me and have a chat, feel free to either send me a message on LinkedIn or pop along to one of our events. Quite a few are free, so you can come along, meet me there. I'm always glad to meet new people, and as you can probably tell, I really love talking. So if you're quite shy, I will just chew your ear off and make you feel comfortable.
Show notes for this episode can be accessed at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP119. You'll find links to the masterclasses, to my masterclasses, links to book a call with ProTax, my contact details, and Chloe's contact details, all in the show notes. You can subscribe for email notifications to make sure that you don't miss out on any future episodes of the podcast, or you don't miss out on any future courses that I'm running. You can subscribe by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. Episodes are released bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away something to help you to progress, develop, and improve your tax career. Until next time.